All right, welcome to the class for Factoring Trinomials I. This will be a difficult lesson for some of you. It is, I think, one of the more difficult concepts we cover in this class, so take your time, but I'm sure you can all do it because we've been building up to it slowly. So the beginning of the lesson is a review of the last video, the last lesson, which was the pattern for multiplying binomials, which is our third method for multiplying binomials. So I just want to review that quickly because it will become useful in this lesson. So we have the two binomials, x plus 5 multiplied times x plus 8. We notice that both of these terms are the same variable. We have x and x here, but they don't have to be x's. We could have a and a, but they have to be the same variable. And we have no numbers. So there's no numbers here. There's a 1 implied, but that's fine. We want there to be a 1 or nothing. Okay, so just the x alone. So now we know we can use our pattern. The pattern can be used. So now we use these two numbers here to fill in the rest. We know the first term has to be x squared because that's what x times x equals. So we're just going to steal that from FOIL. But the next two terms, we're going to use these numbers now. We know the next term has to be an x term. But to get the number part, we add them together. So 5 plus 8 is 13. Now the third term is usually the L of FOIL. And we already know the L for FOIL is multiply the last two terms, which are 5 and 8, which are our two numbers. So 5 times 8 is 40. So we use those same two numbers to help us find the two remaining terms in our trinomial. So notice that we go from two binomials being multiplied together to a single trinomial. Okay, that'll be important to think about during the rest of the lesson. All right, so now we're going to look at just a trinomial. X squared plus 14x plus 24, okay? Now, sometimes you're going to be given a trinomial and you're going to be asked to factor it. So that sounds confusing at first, but like I just said, I just erased it, but we start with two binomials and we usually end up with one trinomial. So now we're starting with a trinomial and we're being asked to factor it. And if we remember our definition of factoring breaking a term into multiples. Okay, and a multiple it's another term being multiplied together, multiplication. So we're going to break this trinomial into two binomials. So we already know it has to look like this with multiplication. Need multiplication for factoring. Okay? So, what is the first thing we should be looking for? Well, let's just look at the first term here. So this requires a lot of backwards thinking. So we have to ask ourselves what two things multiplied together would get us x squared. So what times what equals x squared? X times x, okay? So we're going to put an x and an x here. So we see that we have all addition here. So we're just going to put all addition here. I'll explain that more later. But for now, let's just focus on the number parts. So thinking back to the previous lesson, the pattern, we said that the two number parts here will add to this number and multiply to that number, okay? So far, this fits our model for the pattern because we have the same variables and there's no number part. So that means the pattern would hold if we actually multiplied, so the reverse is possible too. So we have to ask ourselves, what two numbers add to 14 and multiply to 24? Okay? We've seen this question before. Okay? It's our number puzzle. The number puzzle since we've been doing since day one. So again, this is our product and this is our sum. So which two base numbers multiply to 24 but add to 14? So how are we going to do that? Well, we can come up with different lists. So let's just find numbers that add to 14 first, just for the sake of it. 14. Zero plus 14, 1 plus 13, 2 plus 12, 3 plus 11, 4 plus 10, 5 plus 9, and the list goes on and on, okay? We could keep going. If I wanted to use negative numbers, the list technically goes on forever. So now we're going to do the multiply 24. In other words, factor 24. So what numbers multiply to 24? 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. Okay? So now we have this is a complete list, partial. Complete. Partial. I want to show you that because both ways are possible, but there are far more possibilities if you look for the adding one. We see here that there are only 4 possibilities now for the combinations. It has to be one of these pairs. So it's much easier to start with the factoring side of this puzzle. So in other words, the multiplying side. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to now add these together. I'm sure I've done this at the board already. But what's 1 plus 24? 25. 2 plus 12, 14. 8 plus 3, it's 11, and 10. All right? And what number are we looking for? 14. So it's this one. So our two pairs are 2 and 14. 2 and 14. So what does that mean? Let's bring it all back to what we were originally doing. We were doing this number puzzle in order to find the missing numbers for these binomials to help us finish factoring this trinomial. So we use the two numbers from our original trinomial to come up with the numbers 2 and 14. It doesn't matter which one we put it in. Oh, sorry, 2 and 12. 2 and 12. 2 and 12. It doesn't matter which order we put them in. Either way would produce the same answer. All right. So now we're gonna do another example of that. Okay, another example of this. With less notes this time so we can see it in a more succinct way. All right, so x squared plus 19x plus 18. So the first thing we should always do is break it into two bubbles, okay? Most trinomials, or a lot of trinomials we're looking at when we factor them, are going to be broken into two binomial pairs. Sometimes that's not the case, but we'll deal with that when we get there. So since this first term is x squared, we know the only way we could get x squared while we were foiling is if these were both x. So these have to be x. Again, we're only dealing with addition in this lesson, so we're just going to put addition. Or we're only doing addition so far, at least. So now we get to the hard part. We have to ask ourselves two hard questions, or a two-part question. What numbers multiply to 18 and add to 19? Okay? So this one might be a little easier to recognize right away. So like I suggested in the previous example, I like to start with the factoring pairs, okay? 1 and 18, 2 and 9, and 3 and 6. And then I like to figure out which one of these adds to 19. And it's the first one. So as you start doing these more and more, you're going to be able to suspect which ones are the right pairs, but it's important to check. It's important to check. Okay? So again, we steps. Write bubbles fill in variable term find base numbers using the number puzzle with the numbers from the trinomial. Okay? So those are our steps. We write the bubbles, these bubbles. We fill in the missing variable term. Sorry, it kind of ran there. Our variable term is x, so it's x and x. If it was a squared, it would be a and a. You'll see more examples of that in the worksheet. And then the last step is we have to find these base numbers using our number puzzle with the numbers from our trinomial, which are, in this case, are 18 and 19. All right? All right, so we're gonna look at one more example before you can move on, or before you should move on to the lesson. I'm gonna move on to the handout for this lesson. And we're gonna look at one with subtraction finally. So, x squared minus 2x minus 24. Okay? So, we draw the bubbles just the same. This is a positive x squared, so it has to be x and x. Now, we still have to ask our question. What plus what equals this? And what times what equals that? Okay? Again, if you want, you can put it into our number puzzle, if that helps you. You don't have to. Obviously, I don't. But visually, it's helpful for some students. So, negative 24. What multiplies to negative 24? So, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 8, 16, 24, 4 and 6, 5, no, 6 and 4. Oh, we already did that one. All right, so those are all the factors for positive 24, but this is negative 24, so there's twice as many. So these are all negative, but now we have the positive ones too. So now we have to figure out what's the right order and which pair adds to negative 2. This is going to give us 23. This is going to give us 10, 5, 2. All right, so those are all positive. I could have stopped after the first one and known these were all going to be positive, so I should have been looking for one where this side was negative, the larger number side. So this is negative 23. This is negative 10. This is negative 5. Notice they're just the opposite of these ones. So since this is 2, I know this is negative 2, and that's what I'm looking for. So the pair I'm looking for is 4 and negative 6. So 4 plus negative 6 and 4 times negative 6. So notice one's positive and one's negative. So plus 4, because 4 is positive, and we can do minus 6. If you really want, you can do this. but I personally don't like writing it that way. Either's fine. I prefer this way though. All right, so this is a hard lesson. It's going to keep building on this, so please take your time on this worksheet. It's something we're going to work on a lot over the next coming weeks. Thanks. Bye.